I stood on the front porch of my childhood home, arms loaded with carefully wrapped presents, watching snowflakes dance in the yellow glow of the porch light. Christmas Eve had always been magical here, but Derek's face behind the storm door told a different story. My older brother crossed his arms, blocking my path like a bouncer at some exclusive club. His voice cut through the festive December air with surgical precision. Family only. You should go. The words hit me harder than the bitter wind whipping across the driveway. This was the house where I learned to ride a bike, where Mom taught me to make chocolate chip cookies, where Dad and I built that tree house still visible in the backyard oak. Without speaking, I turned around the gift bag, suddenly feeling like lead weights dragging me down. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my car keys in the driveway, the Christmas lights from neighboring houses blurring through unshed tears. The phone buzzed against my chest before I could even start the engine. Mom's number flashed on the screen, and I answered on the second ring, desperate for some explanation that would make sense of what just happened. "Alan, sweetheart, please don't make a scene." Her voice wavered with the kind of nervous energy I remembered from when Derek got arrested for shoplifting in high school. "You know how your brother gets when he's stressed, and Christmas is always hard for him since he lost his job. Maybe it's better if you just come back tomorrow when things calm down." The apologies spilled out of her like water from a broken dam, each excuse for Derek's behavior cutting deeper than the last. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, staring at the warm, yellow windows of the house that no longer felt like home. Through those windows, I could see Derek pacing in the living room, gesturing wildly as he spoke to someone I couldn't see. "Mom, I drove 3 hours to get here." I managed to say, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to sound calm. "I have your presents, your medications from the pharmacy, and that heating pad you wanted for your arthritis. I don't understand why Derek gets to decide who belongs in our family. I know, honey. I know. Look, let me talk to him again. Maybe I can convince him to—" Her voice suddenly became muffled, and I heard the unmistakable sound of her phone slipping from her grasp and hitting the hardwood floor of the kitchen. The line stayed open, and I found myself holding my breath, straining to hear what was happening inside the house. Derek's voice carried clearly through the speaker, sharp with irritation as he addressed our mother. "Put the phone away, Ma. You're just encouraging him. He thinks because he sends that grocery money every month that he owns us or something. Well, he doesn't. This is my home too, and I'm tired of him acting like he's the golden child just because Dad left him more money." My mother's response came as a barely audible whisper, but the words reached me with perfect clarity. "He really thinks his grocery money buys him a place here." The phone went dead silent, and I realized I was holding my breath. Those words echoed in my mind, each syllable a tiny dagger finding its mark. For 3 years since Dad passed away from his sudden heart attack, I had been sending $400 every month to help Mom with groceries. Her Social Security barely covered the mortgage and utilities on the house Dad had worked 2 jobs to pay off, and her arthritis made it difficult for her to work the part-time job at the library she'd held for 15 years. I thought I was being a good son, stepping up the way Dad would have wanted me to. Every month without fail, I transferred that money from my checking account to hers, along with covering her prescription costs and occasional home repairs. When the furnace died last winter, I didn't hesitate to pay for the replacement. When her car needed new tires, I drove down with a check the same weekend she called. But apparently my mother saw it differently. According to her whispered confession to Derek, my financial support wasn't love or responsibility, it was manipulation. She thought I was using money to control her, to buy my way into a family that apparently didn't want me anymore. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I doubled over in the driver's seat, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin. Derek had been living in our childhood bedroom rent-free since losing his job as a warehouse supervisor 8 months ago. While I worked 60-hour weeks as a freelance marketing consultant, building my business from nothing after losing my corporate job, Derek spent his days playing video games and complaining about how unfair life had become. I had been sending grocery money to feed the man who just barred me from my own family home on Christmas Eve. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Please don't be angry. Derek didn't mean it that way. Maybe we can try again after New Year's." I stared at the message for a long time, watching the snowflakes accumulate on my windshield. Then, I did something I had never done before in my 28 years of life. I blocked both my mother's and Derek's phone numbers, opened my banking app, and canceled the automatic transfer scheduled for December 26th. The $400 that would have gone to groceries stayed in my account along with the recurring payment for Mom's medications and the emergency fund I maintained for her unexpected expenses. Derek wanted to know what my grocery money could buy. He was about to find out exactly what it had been buying all along. Christmas morning arrived without the usual flurry of phone calls and text messages that had marked every holiday for the past 3 years. My apartment felt eerily quiet as I made coffee and watched the news, checking my phone periodically to see 17 missed calls from blocked numbers. The blocked calls continued throughout the day, sometimes 3 or 4 in rapid succession, followed by periods of silence that stretched for hours. I spent Christmas afternoon doing something I should have done months ago, going through every financial commitment I had made to help my family since Dad died. The list was longer than I remembered. Beyond the monthly grocery money, I had been covering Mom's internet bill since Derek claimed he needed it for job searching. I paid her heating oil delivery service directly because she worried about budgeting for the seasonal spikes in cost. Her cell phone plan was under my account because it saved her $30 a month. Tuesday morning, I began the systematic process of unwinding 3 years of financial entanglement. The pharmacy was my first call. "Hi, this is Alan Mitchell. I need to remove my credit card from my mother's prescription account. Her name is Dorothy Mitchell, and the account number is..." I read the digits from my records while the pharmacist pulled up the file. "Oh yes, Mr. Mitchell, your mother's medications are scheduled for pickup tomorrow. Are you sure you want to remove the automatic payment method? She has 4 prescriptions that total about $230 monthly." "I'm sure. Please remove my card and update her file to reflect that she'll be paying directly going forward." The heating oil company required a more detailed explanation since I had been the primary contact for deliveries and payments since the previous winter. "Your mother's current balance is 0, Mr. Mitchell, and she's scheduled for a delivery next week. The cost will be approximately $350. Should we call her directly to arrange payment?" "Yes, please. Update her as the primary contact for all future deliveries and billing questions." Each phone call felt like cutting another cord that had bound me to a family that apparently saw my help as manipulation rather than love. The internet provider was the hardest call because Derek had specifically asked me to take over that bill, claiming he needed reliable internet for video conferences with potential employers. After the financial housekeeping, I drove to Riverside Cemetery, where Dad rested under a simple granite headstone Mom and I had chosen together. The cemetery was peaceful on December 27th, with most visitors staying home to recover from Christmas celebrations. I brushed snow from Dad's headstone and sat on the cold marble bench nearby. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do, Dad," I said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to a gravestone. "Derek's turned Mom against me somehow, and she thinks I've been trying to control her with money. Maybe I have been. Maybe I should have asked her what she needed instead of just assuming." A voice behind me said, "Most children who care for aging parents struggle with that balance." I turned to see an elderly man in a navy blue winter coat, carrying a small bouquet of white roses. He appeared to be in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the careful gait of someone managing arthritis or old injuries. "I'm sorry," I said, standing up. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "Nonsense. I'm here every day, rain or shine, and I rarely see anyone talking to their loved ones. I'm Harold, and my wife Eleanor is right over there." He gestured to a headstone 3 rows away, decorated with a small Christmas wreath. We fell into conversation easily, 2 men dealing with loss in different ways. Harold had been visiting Eleanor's grave daily for 4 years since she passed from cancer. He told me about his own struggles with adult children who felt entitled to his financial support without offering emotional connection in return. "I had to cut off my eldest son 2 years ago," Harold said, settling onto the bench beside me. He was 53 years old and still expected me to bail him out of every financial crisis while treating me like an inconvenience. "My wife used to say that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's enabling. But they're family," I protested. Doesn't that mean something? Of course it does. But family relationships require mutual respect and appreciation. If someone takes your kindness for granted and treats you poorly, the relationship becomes toxic, regardless of blood relation. As we talked, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown local number. I let it go to voicemail, but Harold noticed my distraction. "Trouble at home?" he asked gently. "My brother blocked me from entering my mother's house on Christmas Eve. He said family only like I'm some kind of stranger. Then I overheard my mother telling him that I think my grocery money buys me a place in the family." Harold listened without judgment as I explained the past 3 years of financial support and the gradual distance I'd felt growing between my mother and me. When I finished, he was quiet for several minutes, studying the roses in his hands. "Have you considered that your mother might be protecting you from something?" he finally asked. In my experience, when a parent starts pushing away a loving child, there's usually a predator in the family dynamic, someone who benefits from isolating the victim from outside support. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. "Alan, this is Patricia next door to your mother. Can you call me when you get a chance? I'm worried about Dorothy." Harold noticed me reading the message and raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like someone else is concerned, too." Patricia Gonzalez had lived next door to my family for over 20 years, watching Derek and me grow up from her kitchen window that overlooked our backyard. She invited me into her warm, cinnamon-scented kitchen within minutes of my calling her back, pouring coffee from a pot that clearly stayed fresh all day long. "I've been waiting for the right time to reach out to you, Alan," she said, settling across from me at her round kitchen table. I didn't want to interfere in family business, but what happened on Christmas Eve was the last straw. Patricia explained that she had been documenting Derek's behavior for months, initially out of concern for my mother's safety, and later because she suspected criminal activity. She opened a manila folder filled with photographs, printed emails, and handwritten notes with dates and times. "Your brother has been bringing strangers to the house when your mother goes to her doctor appointments." She began spreading photos across the table. These were taken from my security camera system that my son installed after the break-ins last summer. The photos showed Derek standing in our driveway while two men loaded items into a rusty pickup truck. I recognized Dad's toolbox, his fishing gear, and what looked like boxes of books or documents. In one photo, Derek was handing cash to one of the men while they shook hands. "He's been selling your father's belongings." Patricia continued, her voice heavy with disapproval. "Last month, I watched them carry out your old baseball card collection, the one your father spent years helping you build. When I asked your mother about it later, she said she had given Derek permission to clean out the basement, but she looked embarrassed when she said it." My stomach twisted as I studied the photos. Dad's tool collection represented 40 years of weekend projects and repairs around the house. Those tools had taught me to fix leaky faucets, build birdhouses, and repair broken furniture. The baseball cards were a childhood treasure that Dad and I had organized every winter, cataloging new additions and researching the value of vintage finds. "There's more," Patricia said, opening another section of the folder. "I started keeping track of Derek's visitors after I noticed a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, when your mother volunteers at the church food pantry, Derek hosts what looks like poker games in your garage. Usually 4 or 5 men, sometimes more, and they stay for hours." She showed me receipts she had retrieved from her own garbage can. Receipts that had blown over from our yard during windstorms. The receipts were from a local casino and showed significant gambling losses over several months. One receipt alone showed Derek had lost $850 in a single night. The gambling debt started showing up about 6 weeks ago. Patricia continued producing copies of letters that had been delivered to our house. I only saw these because Derek threw them in my recycling bin by mistake one day. When I realized what they were, I started keeping copies. The letters were from collection agencies demanding payment for cash advances Derek had taken against credit cards. The amounts were staggering: $12,000 on one card, $9,000 on another, and smaller amounts scattered across multiple accounts. One letter specifically threatened legal action if payment wasn't received within 10 days. "Patricia, why didn't you call me sooner?" I asked, overwhelmed by the scope of Derek's deception. "I tried to, honey. I called your old number 3 times over the past 2 months, but Derek answered and told me you had changed your number and didn't want to hear from anyone back home. He said you were angry about your father's will and were cutting ties with the family. That explained the distance I had felt from my mother over the past year. I had assumed she was becoming more independent or perhaps struggling with grief in her own way. The truth was that Derek had been systematically isolating her from me while destroying our family's financial stability. Is there more? I asked, though I wasn't sure I could handle additional revelations. Your mother has been covering for him because she's scared, Patricia said gently. Last week I heard them arguing through the kitchen window. Derek was demanding she sign some paperwork, and when she refused, he threatened to have her declared incompetent and put in a nursing home. He told her that he could prove she wasn't capable of managing her finances. The psychological abuse was worse than the financial theft. Derek had been terrorizing our mother into compliance while convincing her that my support came with hidden strings attached. He had turned my genuine care into a weapon against her sense of independence. There's one more thing, Patricia said, hesitating before opening the final section of her folder. Yesterday morning, I saw Derek loading suitcases into a taxi. When I asked your mother about it later, she said he was visiting friends in Florida for New Year's, but she seemed relieved when she said it like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As if on cue, my phone rang with a call from an unknown Florida area code. I let it go to voicemail, but Patricia noticed my recognition of the number pattern. That might be Derek calling from his new location, she said. I have a feeling he's about to discover that his meal ticket has been canceled. The voicemail notification appeared immediately, and I played it on speakerphone. Derek's voice filled Patricia's kitchen, angry and demanding, "Alan, what the hell did you do? Mom's pharmacy called saying her card was declined and the heating oil guy wants payment before delivery. You can't just abandon the family because I hurt your feelings on Christmas. Call me back right now." Patricia and I looked at each other across the table, and I realized that Derek's manipulation had finally encountered a consequence he couldn't control or blame on someone else. "What are you going to do?" Patricia asked. "I'm going to let him call," I said, turning off my phone completely. For the first time in 3 years, Derek gets to face the reality of the situation he created. 3 days of silence ended with a phone call that would change everything. I had just returned from a morning run when my phone erupted with a call from that same Florida number, and this time I decided to answer. Derek's voice exploded through the speaker with the fury of someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. "What did you do? Alan, what did you do?" He was shouting so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Mom called me crying because her medications were declined at the pharmacy. The heating oil company is demanding payment before delivery and the internet got shut off yesterday. You can't just abandon your own mother because I hurt your precious feelings." "I didn't abandon anyone, Derek. I stopped enabling you." My voice stayed calm despite the anger building in my chest. For 3 years, I've been sending money that I thought was helping Mom, but apparently she thinks I'm trying to control her with it. So I removed myself from the equation. "You're being ridiculous. Mom didn't mean anything by what she said. She was just stressed because of the holidays and all the bills coming due at once. You know how she gets when money gets tight. Money gets tight because you're living there rent-free while gambling away thousands of dollars at the casino," I said, surprising myself with my directness. Patricia showed me the receipts. "Derek, I know about the poker games, the credit card debt, and the collection agencies sending threats to Mom's house." The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. When Derek spoke again, his voice had shifted from rage to something more calculating and dangerous. "That nosy neighbor has been watching our house. That's harassment, Alan, and whatever she thinks she saw, she's wrong. Those weren't poker games, they were support group meetings for unemployed workers. The receipts were from office Christmas parties, not gambling. You're choosing to believe gossip over your own brother. What about Dad's tools? Derek, what about my baseball card collection? Patricia has photos of you selling them to strangers. Mom asked me to clean out the basement and garage. She couldn't handle having Dad's stuff around anymore, and your cards were just taking up space. I sold them and gave Mom the money to help with household expenses. I was helping her, not stealing. The lies flowed so smoothly that I could almost understand how Mom had been fooled. Derek had an explanation for everything, delivered with just enough righteous indignation to make his accusers question their own perceptions. Let me ask you something, Derek. If everything you did was legitimate and helpful, why did you leave for Florida right after the creditors started calling? Why didn't you tell me that collection agencies were threatening Mom with legal action? What creditors? His voice cracked slightly, and I knew I had found the weak point in his armor. The letters demanding payment for the cash advances you took against credit cards. $12,000 on one card, $9,000 on another. Did you think Mom could handle those debts on her Social Security income? I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't have to listen to these accusations from someone who cut off his own mother's medication money out of spite. Derek's voice was rising again, but now it carried a note of desperation that hadn't been there before. I'm recording this conversation, Derek. It was a bluff, but it had the desired effect. You can't record me without my consent. That's illegal in Florida. Actually, it's legal in my state as long as one party consents, and I consent. I wasn't entirely sure about the law, but Derek's panic suggested he believed me. And since you're calling me, the conversation falls under my state's jurisdiction. Fine, record whatever you want. I have nothing to hide. But his voice betrayed him, becoming higher and more rushed as he continued. Look, maybe I made some mistakes with the credit cards, but I was trying to help Mom keep the house. Her expenses were more than you knew about, and I was covering the gaps when your grocery money wasn't enough. By taking cash advances against fraudulent credit cards, they weren't fraudulent. Mom signed the applications. The words hung in the air between us, and I could almost hear Derek realizing what he had just admitted. Mom had never mentioned applying for credit cards, and her arthritis made signing documents difficult and painful. Did she sign them, Derek, or did you sign them for her tsani? Look, she asked me to handle the paperwork because her hands hurt too much to write clearly. That's not fraud that's helping. Forging someone's signature on financial documents is fraud, Derek, even if you claim they asked you to do it. How many cards did you open in her name? This is ridiculous. I'm not discussing family financial business with someone who abandoned his responsibilities. Mom needs that grocery money restored immediately, and you need to call the pharmacy and put your card back on her account. What I need to do is protect Mom from any more damage you might cause. She's going to have to deal with your creditors and your gambling debts because you used her address and probably her credit for your schemes. I never gambled with her money. Every dollar I spent was money I earned or borrowed against my own credit. Credit you obtained using her address and information. Derek, I know about the collection letters, the threats of legal action, and the creditors who have been calling the house. Mom has been living in fear because of the mess you created. She hasn't been living in fear, she's been fine until you decided to punish the whole family for one stupid comment she made when she was stressed. One comment that revealed how you've been poisoning her against me for months. How long have you been intercepting my letters and phone calls? The question seemed to catch him off guard because the silence stretched much longer this time. I never intercepted anything. Patricia told me she tried calling my old number 3 times, and you answered each time telling her I had changed my number and didn't want contact with anyone from home. You've been isolating Mom from me while destroying her financial stability. I was protecting her from having to deal with your drama. Every time you called, you just complained about work stress or money problems. She didn't need that negativity in her life. What drama? Derek, what negativity? I sent money every month and called to check on her health and happiness. The only negativity in her life was coming from you. You don't understand the pressure I've been under trying to take care of her while dealing with unemployment and health issues. I made some mistakes, but I was doing my best in a difficult situation. Your best included gambling away thousands of dollars selling Dad's belongings without permission and forging Mom's signature on credit card applications. I didn't forge anything, and I never. Look, maybe I used poor judgment with some financial decisions, but I never intended for things to get so complicated. What's complicated, Derek, is that you're calling me from Florida while Mom deals with creditors and collection agencies you brought to her door. What's complicated is that you spent 3 years convincing her that my help came with strings attached while you were stealing from her. I wasn't stealing. Everything I did was to help keep the house and pay the bills. Help Derek, you've been unemployed for 8 months. You've been living rent-free while I paid for groceries, medications, internet heating oil, and emergency repairs. Instead of looking for work, you've been hosting poker games and gambling away money Mom couldn't afford to lose. Those weren't poker games, they were networking meetings. With cash stakes and poker chips, Derek Patricia has photos. Another long silence, and when Derek spoke again, his voice had lost all its bluster and righteous anger. Alan, look, maybe things got out of hand, but I can fix this. If you restore Mom's accounts and help me get back home, I promise I'll get everything straightened out. I'll get a job and pay back every penny I borrowed. Borrowed, Derek, you didn't borrow anything. You stole Dad's belongings, forged Mom's signature on credit applications, and used her address to hide from creditors. That's not borrowing, that's fraud and theft. Please, Alan, I'm stuck in Florida with no money and no way to get home. The friends I was staying with kicked me out when they found out about the legal troubles. I'm sleeping in my car and I have nowhere else to turn. Legal troubles. What legal troubles? Derek's voice became very small. The collection agencies filed complaints with the sheriff's department back home. There might be warrants for fraud and identity theft. There might be warrants, or there are warrants. I don't know for sure, but the people I was staying with saw something on the internet about it and got scared. They think I used them to hide from the law. Derek, you're calling me from jail, aren't you? The silence that followed answered my question more clearly than any words could have. I found my mother sitting in complete darkness when I arrived at the house 3 hours later, too overwhelmed and ashamed to turn on lights she wasn't sure she could afford to pay for. The woman who had raised me with such strength and determination looked fragile and defeated. Her usually perfect posture collapsed under the weight of everything Derek had put her through. I'm so sorry, Alan, she whispered as I helped her to the couch and turned on a single lamp. I'm so sorry for everything I said, everything I allowed to happen, everything I didn't have the courage to tell you. She cried for 20 minutes while I held her hand, both of us processing the destruction Derek had left in his wake. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying impossible secrets for too long. Derek told me you were only helping with money because you wanted to control my decisions. She began, her words coming slowly and carefully. He said you planned to use your financial support to pressure me into selling the house and moving into senior housing so you could inherit the property sooner. See, the accusation stung, even though I now understood its source. Mom, I never wanted to control anything. I just wanted to make sure you were safe and comfortable after Dad died. I know that now, sweetheart. I think I always knew it, but Derek was so convincing and he had evidence to support his claims. Evidence. She got up slowly and walked to the kitchen, returning with a shoebox full of printed emails and text messages. Derek showed me these conversations where you supposedly complained about having to support me financially and discussed plans to convince me to sell the house. I examined the documents recognizing my email address and phone number, but none of the actual content. The messages depicted me as resentful and manipulative, complaining about the burden of supporting an aging parent and strategizing ways to access my inheritance early. Mom, these are fake. I never wrote any of these emails or sent these text messages. Derek said you might deny it if I ever asked you directly. He said people often forget the cruel things they say when they're stressed about money. The sophistication of Derek's manipulation was staggering. He had created an entirely fictional version of my character and motivations, complete with fabricated evidence to support his lies. No wonder Mom had seemed distant and uncomfortable with my help over the past year. He also intercepted your real messages. She continued, showing me another section of the shoebox. I found these hidden in his room after he left for Florida. The hidden messages were birthday cards. I had sent letters updating her on my business success and photos from my apartment that I had mailed because I knew she preferred physical photographs to digital images. Derek had been stealing my attempts at connection while feeding her fabricated evidence of my supposed manipulation. Why didn't you ask me about any of this directly? I asked, though I was beginning to understand the psychological prison Derek had constructed around her. He said that if I confronted you, you would get angry and cut off all financial support immediately. He convinced me that I was completely dependent on your help and that questioning your motives would leave me homeless and unable to afford my medications. So you felt trapped. Worse than trapped. Derek made me believe that accepting your help was slowly destroying our relationship, but that refusing it would destroy my ability to survive. Every month when your money arrived, I felt guilty and grateful at the same time. She explained how Derek had gradually convinced her that my support was creating an unhealthy dependency that would eventually lead to resentment on both sides. According to his twisted logic, the kindest thing she could do was push me away, before I began to hate her for being a burden. The collection agency started calling 6 weeks ago. She continued pulling out a stack of threatening letters. Derek told me they were scam calls trying to frighten elderly people into paying fake debts. When the letters started arriving, he said they were part of the same scam and threw them away before I could read them carefully. But you saved some of them. I started hiding them after Derek got violent with me for asking too many questions about the calls. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises when I suggested we should call you for advice about handling the harassment. The physical abuse revelation hit me like a physical blow. Mom, Derek hurt you. Just that once, but it was enough to scare me into keeping quiet. He apologized immediately and said the stress of being unemployed was making him act out of character. He promised it would never happen again if I stopped questioning his judgment about family financial matters. I understood now why she had seemed so nervous and apologetic during our recent phone conversations. Derek had trained her to fear the consequences of reaching out to me while simultaneously convincing her that my motives for helping were selfish. The worst part was feeling like I was losing both of my sons. She said, fresh tears starting to fall. Derek was becoming someone I didn't recognize, and you seemed to be growing cold and distant. I thought maybe grief was affecting all of us differently, and that time would eventually heal whatever was broken. Nothing was broken with us, Mom. Derek created all of this chaos to hide his gambling addiction and theft. I know that now. When the creditors showed up with the sheriff's deputy yesterday, I finally understood how bad things had become. Derek wasn't protecting me from your manipulation. He was using me as a shield for his own crimes. A knock at the front door interrupted our conversation, and I looked through the window to see Patricia standing on the porch with an elderly man I didn't recognize. Mom invited them in, grateful for the support and company. "This is Harold," Patricia said, introducing the man I had met at the cemetery. I called him because I was worried about Dorothy being alone while Derek's legal troubles get sorted out. Harold immediately assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had dealt with family financial abuse before. He listened to Mom's story without judgment, offering practical advice about dealing with creditors and protecting her assets from Derek's outstanding debts. The good news is that most of Derek's fraudulent activities can be disputed if you're willing to file police reports and cooperate with the investigation, Harold explained. The bad news is that the process will take time and legal fees that might strain your budget. "I don't care about the money," Mom said firmly. "I want Derek to face consequences for what he did, and I want to make sure he can't hurt anyone else this way." As we talked through the practical next steps, the sheriff's deputy returned with a warrant to search the house for evidence related to Derek's fraudulent credit card applications. The deputy explained that Derek was being held in Florida pending extradition back to our state to face charges of identity theft, elder financial abuse, and fraud. "Your son confessed to using your identity to obtain credit cards and cash advances," the deputy told Mom. "He also admitted to selling property from this house without your knowledge or consent. We'll need to document everything for the prosecution case." The house that had been my childhood sanctuary was now a crime scene, with investigators photographing Derek's room and collecting evidence of his systematic abuse of our mother's trust and finances. "Mrs. Mitchell, is there somewhere else you can stay while we process the scene?" the deputy asked. "We'll need several hours to complete the evidence collection." Harold immediately offered his guest room, and Patricia volunteered to help Mom pack a bag with essentials. As we gathered her medications and clothing, Mom pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Alan, I need you to know that pushing you away was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every time I was cold or distant with you, it broke my heart a little more. I thought I was protecting you from Derek's manipulation, but I was actually protecting Derek from your love and generosity. You don't need to apologize anymore, Mom. We both fell victim to Derek's lies and manipulation. I want you to restore the grocery money and all the other support you were providing. Not because I need it to survive, but because I want our relationship to be honest again. I want your help to come from love, and I want my acceptance of it to come from gratitude, not fear. Are you sure we can start fresh with a different arrangement if you'd prefer more independence? Sweetheart, independence without family connection isn't freedom. It's loneliness. Derek convinced me that accepting help from someone who loves me was weakness. But now I understand that it's actually a form of intimacy and trust. As we loaded Mom's belongings into Harold's car, I realized that Derek's attempt to destroy our family had actually strengthened it in ways he never could have anticipated. The courthouse buzzed with pre-trial activity on a cold February morning as Derek's case moved through the legal system with surprising speed. The fraud had been so extensive and well documented that Derek's attorney recommended a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence and structured restitution payments. I sat beside Mom in the gallery watching my brother shuffle into the courtroom wearing an orange jail uniform and shackles around his ankles. 3 months in county lockup had changed his appearance dramatically. He looked thinner, older, and completely defeated. When he glanced back at us, his eyes held none of the manipulative charm that had fooled our mother for so long. Harold had connected us with Sarah Chen, an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. Sarah had worked tirelessly to document Derek's crimes and protect Mom's assets from his creditors. The evidence was overwhelming: forged signatures on 12 different credit card applications, $8,000 in cash advances spent at local casinos, and the sale of approximately $15,000 worth of Dad's belongings without Mom's knowledge or consent. Your Honor, Derek's public defender began, "My client recognizes the severity of his actions and takes full responsibility for the harm caused to his family. Mr. Mitchell was dealing with severe depression following job loss and turned to gambling as an unhealthy coping mechanism. He deeply regrets his choices and requests the court's mercy in sentencing." The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Linda Washington, stood to address the court with a very different perspective on Derek's crimes. Your Honor, this case represents a systematic pattern of elder abuse that went on for over 8 months. The defendant didn't make one poor choice. He made dozens of calculated decisions to defraud his mother, steal family property, and manipulate his brother's financial support for personal gain. The psychological abuse Mrs. Mitchell endured was just as damaging as the financial theft. When the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a victim impact statement, Mom surprised everyone by standing up and walking to the podium. Your Honor, Derek is my son, and I love him, but what he did to our family was unforgivable. She began, her voice stronger than I had heard it in years. He didn't just steal money or property, he stole my relationship with my other son by making me believe that love and manipulation were the same thing. Her statement continued for 5 minutes, detailing the fear, isolation, and psychological damage Derek had caused through his manipulation and lies. She asked the court to impose a sentence that would include mandatory treatment for gambling addiction and psychological counseling to address the underlying issues that led to his criminal behavior. "I don't want revenge against my son," she concluded. "I want him to get help so he can become the person I raised him to be, instead of the person his addiction turned him into." Derek's sentencing included 18 months in state prison, 5 years of supervised probation and restitution of $37,000 covering stolen property, fraudulent charges, and legal fees. He was also required to complete gambling addiction treatment and psychological counseling before being eligible for early release. The judge's final comments addressed the broader impact of Derek's crimes. "Mr. Mitchell, your actions damaged more than bank accounts and credit scores. You betrayed the trust of family members who loved you unconditionally and created trauma that will take years to heal. Elder abuse is a serious crime that destroys families and communities." After the sentencing, Derek was allowed a brief, supervised visit with Mom and me before being transported to state prison. The conversation was awkward and painful, with Derek struggling to find words that could adequately express his remorse. "I know sorry isn't enough," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I hurt both of you in ways that might never heal completely. The gambling addiction made me think I could fix everything if I just had one big win, but every loss made the lies more complicated. Derek, we want you to get better, Mom said gently. We want you to come home someday as someone we can trust and build a healthy relationship with, but that's going to require real change, not just apologies. I understand. The counseling has already helped me realize how twisted my thinking had become. I convinced myself that taking money and selling Dad's things was helping the family when really I was just feeding my addiction and covering my tracks. I found myself surprisingly emotional during the conversation, mourning the brother I had lost to addiction while hoping for the possibility of redemption in the future. When you get out, we'll be here to support your recovery, I told him. But the support will come with boundaries and expectations that protect everyone involved. Derek nodded, tears streaming down his face. I want to earn your trust back, both of you. I know it will take time and consistent actions, not just words. The visit ended with a brief hug between Derek and Mom, a gesture of forgiveness that didn't erase the past but opened the possibility for a different future. Outside the courthouse, Harold was waiting with Patricia and several neighbors who had come to support Mom through the legal proceedings. The community that Derek had tried to deceive with his lies about my abandonment had rallied around her during the most difficult period of her life. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked as we walked to the parking garage. "Sad, but hopeful," Mom replied. "Sad for the son I lost to addiction, but hopeful for the son who might emerge from recovery." 3 months later, Mom had moved into a beautiful senior living community called Maple Ridge, where she had her own apartment but access to medical support and social activities. The decision came after Derek's creditors were successfully challenged, and her house was sold to pay remaining debts and fund her new living situation. "I thought I would miss the house more," she told me during one of my weekly visits. "But living here has reminded me that home isn't a building, it's feeling safe and connected to people who care about you." Patricia visited regularly, having become like family during Mom's transition. Harold had moved into the same community after deciding that daily cemetery visits were keeping him tied to grief instead of moving forward with life. Derek's first letter from prison arrived 4 months into his sentence, written in careful handwriting that reminded me of the brother I had grown up with. The letter didn't ask for anything except forgiveness and patience as he worked through treatment and counseling. He was learning to face addiction honestly instead of hiding behind manipulation and lies. "I want to be someone you can both trust again," he wrote. "Not because I need anything from you, but because I love you and miss being part of a family that loves each other instead of hurting each other." 18 months later, I stood in the visiting room of the state correctional facility watching Derek walk toward me in civilian clothes for the first time since his sentencing. His early release had been approved after completing substance abuse treatment and demonstrating consistent progress in psychological counseling. The man approaching me looked healthier than he had in years, with clear eyes and the kind of confidence that comes from facing difficult truths about yourself. "Thank you for coming," Derek said as we sat across from each other at a small table. "I know you didn't have to, and I know trust has to be earned back slowly." "Mom wanted to come too, but her arthritis has been acting up this week," I explained. "She's excited about you starting the halfway house program." Derek had been accepted into a residential program that would provide housing and job placement assistance while he transitioned back into society. The program specialized in helping people with gambling addiction rebuild their lives without returning to destructive patterns. "I've been working with a counselor who specializes in family recovery," Derek said. "She's helped me understand how my addiction affected everyone around me, not just myself. I want to make amends, but I also want to make sure I don't create new problems while trying to fix old ones." The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering Derek's progress in treatment, his plans for rebuilding his life, and his understanding of the damage he had caused to our family. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my actual brother instead of the manipulative stranger addiction had turned him into. "The hardest part of recovery has been accepting that I chose gambling over family loyalty," Derek said. "I convinced myself that I was protecting Mom from your supposed manipulation. But really I was protecting my addiction from your genuine care and support." What does your counselor say about rebuilding family relationships? I asked. That it requires consistent actions over time, not grand gestures or dramatic promises. She says trust is built in drops and lost in buckets, so I need to be patient with the rebuilding process. Derek had already found employment at a local manufacturing plant, starting as a warehouse worker with opportunities for advancement based on performance and reliability. His supervisor was aware of his background and had agreed to provide regular progress reports to his parole officer. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were before, Derek said as our visit time ended. I just want the chance to be the kind of brother and son our family deserves. 3 months later, Derek's first supervised visit to Mom's apartment at Maple Ridge went better than any of us had expected. He brought flowers and a handwritten letter of apology that he read aloud, taking full responsibility for his actions, without making excuses or asking for immediate forgiveness. I stole more than money and property, he said to Mom. I stole years of honest relationship between you and Alan, and I stole our family's sense of safety and trust. I understand if forgiveness takes time, and I'm prepared to earn it through consistent actions rather than words. Mom listened without interruption, then surprised all of us by asking Derek to help her organize photo albums from our childhood. The activity gave them a chance to remember positive family memories while acknowledging how far we had all come from those simpler times. Recovery isn't just about Derek. Mom told me later that evening, we all had to recover from the trauma of what happened and learn new ways of relating to each other. The following Christmas Eve found us gathered in Mom's apartment at Maple Ridge, joined by Harold, Patricia, and several other friends from the senior community. The gifts under the small tree were modest, but meaningful, chosen with careful attention to each person's interests and needs. Derek had been living independently for 6 months by then, maintaining steady employment and attending weekly counseling sessions. His relationship with Mom and me was cautious, but genuine, built on honest communication rather than manipulation or obligation. I'm grateful for the boundaries you set, Derek told me as we helped Mom clean up after dinner. Enabling my addiction would have been cruel, even though stopping the financial support felt harsh at the time. I'm grateful you chose recovery over resentment, I replied. It would have been easy to blame everyone else for the consequences of your choices. As the evening wound down, Mom asked us all to share something we had learned over the past 2 years. Harold talked about the importance of community in healing from loss. Patricia shared her belief that speaking up about problems, even when it feels like interfering, can save lives and families. When my turn came, I found myself thinking about the journey from that Christmas Eve, when Derek blocked the door to this Christmas Eve, when we were choosing to rebuild our family with healthier foundations. I learned that love requires boundaries, I said. Real love means refusing to enable destructive behavior, even when saying no feels cruel. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force someone to face the consequences of their actions. Derek's reflection surprised me with its depth and honesty. I learned that addiction doesn't just hurt the addict, it turns the addict into someone who hurts the people they love most. Recovery means taking responsibility for that damage and doing the hard work of becoming trustworthy again. Mom's words brought tears to everyone's eyes. I learned that family isn't just about blood relation or shared history. It's about choosing to support each other's growth and healing, even when that growth requires difficult changes. As we said goodbye that evening, I realized that Derek's attempt to destroy our family had ultimately taught us how to love each other more honestly and effectively. We had learned to distinguish between helping and enabling, between loyalty and manipulation, between genuine care and toxic dependency. The financial support I now provided to Mom came with clear boundaries and open communication. Derek's participation in family activities was based on his continued commitment to recovery and honest behavior. Our relationships were healthier because they were built on mutual respect rather than guilt manipulation or obligation. Looking back, I understood that walking away from that Christmas Eve confrontation had been the beginning of healing rather than the end of our family. Sometimes love means setting limits that force growth and change. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's destructive patterns. Derek's recovery was ongoing and would require lifelong commitment to healthy choices and honest communication. But for the first time in years, our family was built on a foundation of trust that had been tested and proven strong enough to support real love. The missed calls that had flooded my phone that Christmas morning had been cries for help, disguised as demands for enabling. By choosing not to answer them, I had created space for all of us to grow into better versions of ourselves. Real family doesn't just accept you unconditionally, it loves you enough to hold you accountable for becoming the person you're capable of being. That Christmas Eve, when Derek blocked the door, he thought he was protecting his addiction from consequences. Instead, he was opening the door to recovery, redemption, and a family relationship based on truth rather than manipulation. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you love in order to protect both of you from destructive patterns? Sometimes the most challenging family situations teach us the most valuable lessons about the difference between enabling and truly helping someone we care about. I'd love to hear your thoughts about finding that balance between loyalty and accountability in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own family experiences, please like this video and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of boundaries in relationships. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and building stronger connections with the people who matter most. Thank you for listening, and I hope your own family relationships are filled with the kind of honest love that helps everyone grow and heal together.